welcome to Tea and Trowels, the video series from the Florida Public Archaeology Network, where we talk to archaeologists about their research and what archaeology means to them. I'm one of your hosts, Emily Jane Murray, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Lori Lee, an archaeologist and professor of anthropology from Flagler College. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your mug?
Yeah, sure. I'm Lori Lee. I'm an associate professor of anthropology at Flagler College, and I am an historical archaeologist specializing in African diaspora work. The mug I have today reflects that. This is a mug from Fort Mose, where I recently started a project last summer, collaborative project with James Davidson at University of Florida, looking more into the history of Fort Mose and the African and African-American peoples who lived out there. So.
Very cool. I feel like for that mug to really fully represent Fort Mose, it should just have like pluff mud all over half of it.
It's the right color. It's the right color for that. Yeah. And I should say these are sold by the Florida, the Fort Mose Historical Society out at the site. So they do a nice job of supporting the site.
Very cool. Well, I brought my Flagler College mug, Go Saints, and it's also gigantic, and we were discussing how important a gigantic coffee mug is to have lots of coffee. But this is from my days when I was at Flagler College, their 40th anniversary, and they didn't have an anthropology major, so I majored in communication, but I hear they do now, thanks in part to some of your hard work.
Yes, it's so exciting. For 2 months, I was just thinking that this morning, 2 months today, it's been approved, our anthropology major. So we're excited about the fall to have our first, we'll actually have our first anthropology graduates in the fall. Some people have been lingering around hoping it would get approved. So we'll have our first senior seminar in the fall and our first anthropology major graduates. So we're very excited about that.
That's awesome. Do you think I can re-enroll?
I think you can, because I know someone else who is. Yes, you can come back and take the senior sim. We have a student who's graduating this semester with a sociology degree, but she's going to come back and take 2 classes in the fall so that she can get her anthropology degree.
That's awesome. Very cool. So we'll get to our questions here. Why did you become an archaeologist?
So for me, I guess that was more kind of a journey of discovery, kind of like archaeology itself. When I was a freshman in college, I was late in deciding which university I wanted to go to. So by the time I registered, there were no English classes and no history classes, something you'll be familiar with. But I was wandering down the hall, sad about this, and ran into a woman who turned out to be a faculty member who was the director of the honors program. And she said, "Oh, well, tell me about your grades." And so I did. And she said, "Oh, well, come with me. If you're in the honors program, then you can get a math class and an English class." So my first semester, it was in the honors program. And one of the classes that we took was an art history class that was taught by an archaeologist. So I knew I really liked that. And then I started taking anthropology classes, but I had degree plans on file in 7 different departments. So I had a wide variety of interests, which included languages and computer science engineering, and I wanted to be a human rights attorney. And what I knew most of all is I didn't want to do the same thing for 30 years. So I realized along the way that anthropology would allow me to combine all of my interests, so I could rely on what I was interested in: languages, human rights issues, and through archaeology and through the archaeology field school that I did as an undergraduate, I realized that was the way I wanted to go. So it was a process.
That's awesome. Yeah, I joke archaeology, we just steal all the best parts of everything else, and that's why it's such a wonderful field, because we can just do it all and still call it archaeology and anthropology. So
it's remarkable. It's remarkable.
Can you tell us a little bit about your research in 30 seconds?
Yes. So my research is really about migration, memory, and race. So largely centered on the African diaspora. So I've worked at a number of different sites associated with African diaspora populations in the Caribbean and Southeast United States. I was fortunate enough to be able to work at the Harriet Tubman site in New York when I was a student at Syracuse as well. So looking at all those different aspects of displaced peoples, migration, forced migration, and then being able to use that knowledge and understand legacies of enslavement, and also things like contemporary migration of people who are forcibly displaced, like migrants. So that's where my interests are. And medical, my master's degree is in medical anthropology. So when I decided to do historical archaeology, it took me a few years, but then I began incorporating medical anthropology into my studies as well. So I'm very interested in health practices in the past and into the present.
Very cool. A nice wide variety of things to think about, because it's not all as straightforward, right? And pulling in all sorts of things.
You can see the diversity of my interests based on my 7 different degree plans. So using French to translate documents written by Haitian migrants, that kind of thing. And then computer technology. So I was computer science engineering for a little while too, which I loved, but it was just too socially distant for me. But certainly our databases require and archaeology, ArcGIS requires some level of technical expertise as well. So.
Well, what's some of your favorite tool? What's your favorite tool when you look into some of these topics?
So I did bring my favorite tool from the field. So I don't know if that's what you meant, but I do have it here on the shelf. And it is this one. It is my trowel. And yes, this is in Marshalltown, and it was originally 3-inch size. But this is what happens when you work in red clay. So I have profound and deep respect for my colleagues who learn how to work in red clay. We're continually sharpening our trowels. We learn all the different techniques for that. I recommend a good sander for that. But it takes a lot of strength and skill and expertise to work in red clay. And to go from red clay to the sands of Florida was quite a change. So this trowel has still been useful though, and working with more delicate matrix. So that is by far my favorite tool because it is an artifact of years of labor. So it's pretty impressive. We don't have too much clay here in Florida. I think the red clay of Florida are the shell middens, where you have to take like pickaxes to them. It's like concrete sometimes to get them to break apart. I learned all about that last summer with Mose. How do we best do this? And yes, it did require a pick that I was given in Virginia. So that worked out well too. Patience is what it takes to be a good archaeologist. Yes, that's for sure.
Yes, it's not all bullwhips and running through temples. It's scrape.
No.
Scrape.
Yes.
So do you have a best, worst field story that you can now laugh about?
Best, worst field story. I have several, but how tell without implicating other people? Oh, I have one that doesn't implicate anyone. Okay, so my first dissertation project was supposed to be in Cuba, in the Matanzas province. So my dissertation advisor, Teresa Singleton, was working in the Matanzas province on a coffee plantation. So she arranged for me to go to Cuba with her, and we were going to go around to several different sites, sugar plantations that we had identified as being good possibilities to answer the research questions I had. And we were there for several days, and then the day came when we were supposed to go out to visit the sites the very next day. And we got a call at 4:30 p.m. from the government letting us know that all those site visits had been canceled because it was a matter of national security. So while we were in the country in 2001, Fidel Castro was out of the country and he fainted. And there was huge concern about what would happen and what this might mean. He was in Bolivia. And so we weren't allowed to go to the sites. So I learned a really important lesson about working in other contexts and thinking through those possibilities, because fortunately that happened before I started a project, but it could have happened at any point along the way. And your artifacts, understandably, need to remain in Cuba, but you may or may not have access to them depending on what is going on in Cuba and the relations between the United States and Cuba. So that's not the best way to do a dissertation project, but given the connection between Fort Mose and the people went from there to the Matanzas province in Cuba, it's possible that I could do a post-dissertation project in that same area. So, and I learned that you can apply your research questions, same research questions, to different areas. So I came up with a different location for my research.
I think that's something that I, especially as somebody who has only worked in the United States, don't really even consider or think about or take for granted, is having access to sites and having that not rely on normal, regular bureaucratic things or permission or whatever, but have it rely on
no control over.
Yeah. So
yeah, things you can't foresee. But if you're not Cuban, I think Cubans were like, oh, of course. And it took me a while to realize that, yes, of course, but it was a painful lesson. So.
Well, I'm glad you found another site. And that, yeah, I mean, like, do you need somebody to come help with future research in the Matanzas
Yes.
province?
I think it must be a collaborative project between FPAN. I mean, we're at Flagler College. We will do it as a flagship program.
It's really interesting. I guess some folks have kind of looked at those connections before, but I think more from the Spanish connections versus folks of African descent who would have been in those communities. So yeah. Well, our big and best question here for last: how do you think archaeology can help save the world?
I think archaeology can help save the world in multiple ways. I think, again, because it's heavily on my mind, because I'm working on reports right now, Fort Mose, a site like Fort Mose that Kathy Deegan and Jane Lenders did so much work to demonstrate that it was there and create this historic site of memory that people can come to and connect with the first legally sanctioned free African settlement in the United States is remarkable, right? And it's only through archaeology that we were able to do that. Well, archaeology and history, Jane Lander's work as well, equally. And that's why I like doing historical archaeology, because we can draw upon multiple resources. And the exhibit there is so extremely well done in terms of representation of peoples. So I think people can really see the intercultural interaction that happened with people in a place like Spanish Florida. And they can understand that there were many different trajectories with the intercultural interactions that happened. There was nothing inevitable about African people coming over and being enslaved. Archaeology can also reveal those processes of racialization by which slavery became associated with African descendant people, whereas that wasn't what it was like initially. And we can actually see that over time. So I guess the synchronic and diachronic nature of it, see how people started otherizing people over time, starting marking their difference by creating separate spaces for people of different perceived ethnicities, and different practices, different laws associated with those peoples. That helps us to understand things like legacies of enslavement too. And I think those kinds of things are really important for understanding and tying into understanding structural inequality today, and other important processes. Like, for instance, now you can see, of course, neo-fascism around the world, and understanding how those processes of otherization are taking place, and what are the material markers of that, and how are those types of symbolic violence that we're seeing. Archaeologists are really well attuned to understanding the materiality of processes like that, pointing that out. Our attention to detail and understanding processes, I think, is really key. And that's why I'm excited that historical archaeologists are looking at the contemporary projects now too, like working with the migrants. I think those are so key and so important in helping people. The other level of it is helping people empathize, because when people are otherized, so example, undocumented migrants, people can see them as distinctive and other from themselves. But when you do something like collect the objects that migrants leave behind on the trail, and what you see is objects like a backpack, a Sesame Street backpack, people can identify with that object as the object of a child, and before they add any identity politics to it, right? So creating empathy so people can connect with the human level, again, I think is important too, an important role of archaeologists.
Yeah, I don't think we often unpack kind of in our everyday lives the process, like you're saying. Like, we see the outcome, and we, looking back on things, maybe only see parts of it, and really only think about the end result, but we don't see all those things that happened to get us to where we are, or to get people to the end result, in the past. I think that's a really great point, to think about the process, and to be able to pick it apart and then relate it to what we're seeing today. It's just something that's really, really powerful.
Yeah. Understanding why African Americans are incarcerated at such high rates, why they're dying from coronavirus at higher rates, and Native Americans. Archaeologists can really help make those connections across time. And I think that's a real strength.
Yeah. Well, we have one more bonus question for you. What has been keeping you sane during the pandemic, during our social distancing and quarantining? And
Well, I think it's kind for you to assume that I'm sane at this point, but I would say in my moments of sanity, it's probably because I run. I run almost every day, and I read. So, well, let me back up for a second. Up until now, I've been very fortunate in that my job has continued. And so, teaching at Flagler, my grades are due tomorrow. So I've had plenty to keep me distracted and busy with transitioning to teaching online, which I had never done before. So that kept me very focused on that thing. But when it wasn't enough to keep me distracted, then there's running and reading. So up to now, I've been reading all of the things that I need for class prep, and late at night, I read novels. So those help me to disconnect in a way that I can I found that I sleep much better, because sleeping tends to be the tricky part right now, is being able to go to sleep. But if I read novels that I can escape into, then I sleep much better. So running and reading, I would say.
very,
What about you?
So say we'll have to chat later and exchange some book titles. I'm not a runner. Been doing yoga and trying to read, but
I hear we're reading one of the same books. So Gods of the Upper Air, maybe. So we'll see. Anyway, we'll talk about that a little more, and maybe book club ideas.
Yes, there we go. Awesome. Well, thank you, Lori, for joining us today, and thanks for everyone for watching along at home, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Next time.